Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the second lecture, actually the third one, but Dr. Robertson gave the same one twice, and stirring they were on both occasions. The second lecture in our series of presentations marking the 200th anniversary of the birth of Robert E. Lee at Stratford, our celebration of an American icon. Thank you very much for joining us today on this chilly February day. I'd like to once more thank the Lee Jackson Educational Foundation for their help in underwriting today's program and for our entire series of activities spanning the year 2007. I'd like to particularly thank Judy Henson today, who contacted our speaker and made various arrangements for her to join us, and of course the other Stratford staff for all they've done to make your visit enjoyable today. A couple of reminder items before we get started. First of all, if you have a cell phone and it's still on, we certainly would appreciate it if you would turn it off for the period of the lecture. Refreshments will continue to be served after the lecture, and so we hope you'll stay and take the opportunity to eat a few more cookies and drink some more hot cider, and perhaps have an opportunity to chat with our speaker as well, who is a very, very interesting person to chat with, I can assure you. Unfortunately, despite all our hopes, hers and ours, her new book is not quite ready yet. It's just out there on the immediate horizon. But there is information that we can distribute about early ordering of that publication, and at a very good price. And so we'll have that for you after the program in case you want to take that along and do exactly what I'm going to do and go ahead and get a copy of it as soon as possible. We do, of course, have other books available from individuals who have been speakers in the Path of Honor lecture series, which was, I think many of you had the opportunity to attend one or several or all of those, and those are available at our bookshop. And we still have copies of our new Robert E. Lee commemorative essays on the bicentennial of his birth. Actually, the number of hardback copies is dwindling rapidly, so if you're thinking about buying one of those, this is the time to go ahead and move on that. Pardon the shameless commercialism here. Well, it is indeed a tremendous pleasure for me to have the honor of introducing Elizabeth Pryor, who I'd gotten to know just a little bit when she was conducting some rather extensive research here at Stratford in relation to the publication of her new book. And of course, now that she's been here for a day, I've gotten to know her a little bit better and enjoyed every minute, as I say, of our conversation. She's an individual who has successfully pursued in tandem two careers, one as an award-winning historian and the other as a senior diplomat in the U.S. Foreign Service. And she has found, as I think we would expect, that those experiences have been mutually reinforcing. Her personal experience at such pivotal events as the overthrow of apartheid in South Africa and the 1991-95 war in Bosnia have made her understanding of history unusually incisive, while her writing ability and historical perspective have helped to put her in the front ranks of American diplomacy. Most recently, she's combined a Mellon Research Fellowship at the Virginia Historical Society with an assignment as the Senior Advisor on European Affairs to the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives. In addition, she's spoken all over the world on American history and American diplomacy. I hope you'll indulge me in just reading, as I go through some of her professional positions in the diplomatic world, because it's an impressive list. From 2002 to 2005, she was the Senior Advisor on European Affairs to the U.S. Congress. Her diplomatic rank was Minister Plenipotentiary. From 1997 to 2001, she was the Minister Counselor to the U.S. Mission to NATO. Prior to that, she was the Director of Policy for the European Bureau of the State Department. In 95 and 96, she was the Charge d'Affaires of the U.S. Embassy in Sarajevo. 92 to 95, she was the Counselor of the U.S. Mission to the Organization on Security and Cooperation in Europe. And prior to that, 6 positions as Director of Arms Control, the National Security Council, Senior Negotiator on the Treaty of Conventional and Armed Forces Europe, First Secretary of the U.S. Embassy in South Africa, and Second Secretary of the U.S. Embassy in Madrid. Her professional positions in the field of history have included, again, the Mellon Fellowship that I mentioned a moment ago. She was Director also of History in the Archaeology Office in Fairfax County, Virginia, and a historian with the National Park Service, which she was telling me that, though obviously she's more recently been involved with in foreign affairs, she still takes great pride in her involvement with the National Park Service and the professionalism of that federal agency. She's won numerous awards in history, including the Dartmouth Medal for Outstanding Historiography. She received a National Book Award nomination for her biography of Clara Barton, entitled Clara Barton, Professional Angel. Her awards in diplomacy, again, they go on for a great length, and I know she will not want me to read all those, but just several I will cite. 2005, she received from the U.S. Congress a public proclamation and flag flying for, quote, years of dedicated service to the United States. She received a Superior Honor Award from the Department of State for developing a White House strategy to combat human trafficking. She received a Superior Honor Award from the Department of State for overseeing the investigation of Swiss complicity with Nazi Germany. That would have been a very interesting one, I think. And on. A Superior Honor Award from the Department of State for working on defeating apartheid in South Africa. Today, of course, we're really focusing on her upcoming publication I've already alluded to, and that is Reading the Man, a portrait of Robert E. Lee through private letters. And both Judy Henson and I have had a chance to just peek through this advanced copy, and it is an exciting publication, and all looking forward to reading it. Coming up too very, very soon in the March 2007 edition of the Virginia Magazine of History and Biography is an article she's written called Rediscovered, Robert E. Lee's Earliest Known Letter. Again, I mentioned her work on Clara Barton, which I think stands as the definitive biography of Clara Barton. And prior to that, she has written numerous publications for the National Park Service. She has a bachelor's degree from Northwestern University and the University of London, a master's degree from the University of Pennsylvania. Her topic today is Robert E. Lee, New Documents and New Questions. Please join me in welcoming Elizabeth Brown Pryor.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Ken, for such a nice introduction. You know, there are very few places I would rather be than here at Stratford Hall. It's such an inspiring place, beautiful, and just absolutely fills us with awe of the historical events and personalities that have been here. But also because I had such a rich experience here in doing the research for this book, and I have to single out Judy Henson, the Director of Research here, for the help on that. She is an absolute jewel that you have among you. She's not only one of the most knowledgeable people that I came into contact while I was doing the research for this book, but she rescued me more times than I can tell you in needing quick fixes and do you have a letter we can use as the end papers on the book, and what do I do about the resolution on this picture, and so on. Really a one-woman band, and I can't tell you how much I'm in debt to her and to Stratford for the rich collections that are here that inspired my writing, and also for her personal help. So I hope she's greatly appreciated in this community. And I'm delighted to be talking to all of you because people like you, people who keep alive beautiful historic properties like Stratford, who are interested in history, who take the trouble to know about our nation's history, I think are very, very important for understanding who we are and for maintaining the sense of place that we have in some place like Stratford. I had the great pleasure this morning of walking around the grounds here and imagining Robert E. Lee as a little boy, maybe treading some of the paths that I was on, and feeling, as I said, again, very, very inspired. So my thanks to Stratford and my thanks to all of you for being here today, but also for the support you give to a place like Stratford. What I wanted to do today was talk a little bit about how I came to write this book about Robert E. Lee. I think we could say it might be a bold or even foolhardy thing to write another book about Robert E. Lee. I think there are about 500 listed at the Library of Congress right now. And then to talk about some of the documents I found along the way and what they tell us, some of the questions that they answer and some of the questions that they pose, and then share one of them with you and let you go on a historical excursion with me on how we view a document like this, how we read through it, and what we want to get out of the pieces of material that we have left that define our history. The inspiration for this book was the opportunity that I had a number of years ago to read a cache of letters, private letters by Lee, that had not been widely distributed. Few people had had the opportunity to see them. And I was very privileged to see them. And I had not really known very much about Robert E. Lee. I mean, I knew sort of the exoskeleton of his life. But I did not, I was neither filled with awe, as some people are, nor did I see him as a polarizing figure, somebody who maybe represented oppression or treachery of some sort. He seemed to me, like his friend Mary Boynton Chestnut said, maybe a little bit too cold, quiet, and grand to be of much interest. But I had the opportunity to read these letters, and I was absolutely riveted by them. I was absolutely riveted by not the great General Lee, but this human being had written such a marvelous collection of letters. And I found him to be far more complex and contradictory than the simple Christian gentleman that he was sometimes portrayed as. Now here's what a pretty recent biographer said about him. He says about his letters, "If Lee were ever exalted or depressed, sad or gay, baffled or confident, there's virtually no trace of it in his letters. There's no indication of any internal development or change or struggle." Well, on the contrary, I did not find that at all. I found him to be altogether human. I found him to be quirky, contradictory, vulnerable, grand, and altogether more appealing than what I had been taught to believe. I also found him to be very good company, so I enjoyed this very much. Now, I was not the first person to think that maybe we hadn't quite gotten at who the real Robert E. Lee was. It's something that a lot of historians have discussed over the years and tried to delve into over the years. And one of the earliest people to do this was a man named Stephen Vincent Benet, a great poet, who in 1927 wrote a poem called John Brown's Body. And those of you who are interested in the Civil War, I really highly recommend it to you. I think it's still one of the very best things ever written. Long narrative poem, but he gets at the nuggets of truth on an awful lot of things. And this is what he says about Robert E. Lee. He says, "Worshipped, uncomprehended, and aloof, a figure lost to flesh and blood and bones, frozen into a legend out of time, a blank verse statue. How to humanize that solitary gentleness and strength hidden behind the deadly oratory of 20,000 Lee Memorial Days. We can lie about him. We can dress a dummy up in his uniform and put a dummy's words in his mouth, but he remains beyond our stagecraft, a riddle unread. And everything that we have said is true, and nothing helps us yet to read the man." So the name of my book is Reading the Man, and it's an attempt to use private letters of Robert E. Lee that have not been made public before to flesh out this one-dimensional person. Now, I came to view this as a kind of treasure hunt, and when I would come home from the Foreign Service and we would be on what we call home leave, I would go off to all kinds of places and see if I could find letters that hadn't been used, hadn't been published, and I found a lot. I found hundreds and hundreds of these letters that had been either overlooked or in some cases, I fear, willfully ignored. Some of the most important of those letters are here at Stratford. They have a marvelous collection. They have letters that really flesh out Lee's political views after the Civil War. They have letters that tell us quite a lot about how he made his decision to, and how he viewed his decision to side with the South. An extraordinarily beautiful letter that he wrote to his two daughters, Agnes and Annie. Wonderful letter about the Mexican War that he wrote to his brother Smith, who's hanging on the wall over there. So these were very important documents. And then last year, I was very, very lucky to be given access to several collections of private papers, which again had not been made public, including a real treasure trove, veritable trunks in the attic that had just recently been found that are still in a private collection now. They're going to be made available to other scholars in a few months. It's going to be a great treat for everybody when they are, and a great eye-opener. But I was, as I said, very, very privileged to use them as material for my book. So I had all these letters, this grand cache of fabulous historical documents written in a very appealing way by a very appealing man. I had one of the most dramatic stories in American history, as we know, to talk about. A great cast of characters, some of whom lived here at Stratford, and many of you know those stories. His 7 children and all kinds of eccentric and lovable characters that are in the family. It's a great family story, too. But it's also one of the most overwritten stories in American history. And so I had to decide, what am I going to do with this? How can I present this in an original way? So what I decided to do was to write a series of essays about Lee and about his family, and to use some of these letters that had not, and documents that had not been published before, as what I call departure points for historical excursions. So every chapter starts with the full text of one of these letters so people can really read them for themselves and scholars can look at them. And then I let the letter lead us where it will, often to places that we wouldn't expect, often with surprising revelations, and sometimes just with a lot of intrigue in what was going on in the time that Lee lived and how he viewed the vagaries of human existence, really. I used as my model the way that art historians often explain a painting. I know that many of you have been to museums and had experts show you paintings, and they're able to embellish it in a way that is different from your first reaction. If you look at something and it's on the wall, and maybe it's a vase of flowers or maybe it's a landscape, you have an immediate reaction to it. You have maybe an emotional reaction to it. You like it, you don't like it, whatever. But when an expert tells you how the paint was mixed, or who the patron was who wanted that painting made, or what the iconography is, the picture becomes something more than it was the first time that you looked at it. And that's what I hope that in explaining what is behind many of Lee's letters and using them to launch forth on some surprising journeys, that the letters will become more valuable. They will be heightened and will have more context than they would have just reading on their own. They're about every imaginable topic. I talk about him as an engineer. There are a number of them that are about slavery. I'm actually quite interested in him as an engineer because I think it colors the way he views life in many aspects. Letters about his home, letters about his general